Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Jennifer Friel, and I'm the Strategic Partnership and Program Manager here at the Pennsylvania Municipal League. We're pleased to have experts with us today to walk through the essentials of tax anticipation notes and how they help municipalities bridge budget timing gaps. If you have any questions during this presentation, feel free to throw them in the chat, and they will be addressed at the conclusion of this webinar. Please join me in welcoming Tom Wyatt from Obermeyer, who will introduce our panel today.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Jennifer, and thanks you all for joining us. Again, I'm Tom Wyatt. I'm a partner here at Obermeyer, and I am joined today by an extraordinary group. In total, there's more than a century of experience in municipal finance, municipal leadership, and banking, and so very pleased to bring this program to PML and to each of you. And let me introduce the group very quickly, and each of them will be going. Derek will be going first. Derek, for this group in particular, needs no introduction. He's a local, state, and national leader in municipal finance. He's a recovering banker, as I've recently been told, and he'll be leading off today. I'm also joined by the chair of the firm, David Nassiter. He's been a leader at the firm for a long time, and we're very proud to have him as our chair. And he's also very active in the finance world, among other things. And then we've got Zach Willard from PFM. He's on the screen there. He's a managing director at PFM, and we're very thankful for him here. And then we've got Tim Kerr here in the room, director at PNC Capital Markets. Thanks for joining us. And so with no further ado, I will turn it over to Derek Green.
Well, thanks, Tom, for the introduction. You said I was a recovering banker. That was some time ago when I actually had hair. I'm also a recovering elected official, and those were some great times. And it's interesting when you think about the title of this presentation. It's the most wonderful time of the year. And yes, we're all starting to think about Thanksgiving and the holidays and the new year, but also for many jurisdictions, you're getting to halfway through your fiscal year. And so that can be a very challenging time, especially when you have extraordinary events that impact your general fund and the revenue for your jurisdiction. We just recently saw that the state budget impasse has been resolved. We now have a state budget. At the federal level, we're working through a federal shutdown, which hopefully will be resolved in a few days. And so these external things can really have an impact on your jurisdiction and your city. And so when I look at the great panel of people that we have here from PFM and PNC, and of course, Obermeyer, we have a lot of experience in these issues. And for me, it's great to have a partner with the Pennsylvania Municipal League as a past president of the Pennsylvania Municipal League. Now, some of you may be thinking, okay, well, Derek, you were finance chair for city council in the city of Philadelphia. City of Philadelphia is the only city of the first class in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. How can you relate to some of the issues that I may be having at a much smaller jurisdiction when you're talking about issues of cash flow and timing of funds? And it brought me back to my first interaction with the Pennsylvania Municipal League. And I joined the board, and although this gentleman is no longer with us, but George Hood was the mayor of Indiana, Pennsylvania. And we were having a conversation about some of the issues and challenges that he was having at Indiana, Pennsylvania. The fact that Indiana University of Pennsylvania was such a large entity within his jurisdiction that was an area and an entity they really couldn't tax. And it made me think of some of the same challenges we have here in the city of Philadelphia regarding entities that we're not able to tax. And so what that gave me is a perspective that the differences between Indiana, PA and Philadelphia, PA is really not as much as I thought, especially when it comes to finances. It's just a matter of zeros and commas. So the challenges that a smaller jurisdiction may be having in your mid-year, as we're getting ready for the Christmas holidays and going to the first quarter of next year, is not that much different than the city of Philadelphia when you have these extraordinary events. Like, for example, events like COVID or 9/11 or a state budget or federal shutdown are some of the type of events that can really impact your jurisdiction. Also, Tom mentioned some of the work I've done around the country I served on the executive committee of the National League of Cities. And it reminded me during COVID, a good friend of mine, Dan Johnson, was the mayor of Savannah, Georgia. And right as COVID went into effect in March of 2020, one of the big issues that he had was, I got to deal with the St. Patrick's Day parade. And I said, well, why would that be an issue in Savannah, Georgia? Little did I know that the St. Patrick's Day parade in Savannah, Georgia is one of the largest ones in the country. And by not having or deciding if they want to cancel the parade, how that would impact the general fund of his city. And so these external events are things that you have to think about. And how do you manage cash flow during that time of year, especially as you're going to the end of the calendar year, going into the beginning of your new first quarter of a new calendar year, but your fiscal year doesn't start until July. So you need to think about what are some of the different opportunities and ways to deal with these issues. For the city of Philadelphia, we use tax revenue anticipation notes. There'll be some additional conversation about the difference between a TRAN, a tax revenue anticipation note, or a TAN, a tax anticipation note. From my perspective, the real difference is that TRANs, which are ones that we use in the city of Philadelphia, we look at both tax revenues coming in and also other revenue that may be coming in from other sources to your city. So you got to make a distinction which type of note you're going to use to help and deal with your cash flow issues. The city of Philadelphia often use TRAN, actually only use TRANs from my experience, and the last one was in September of 2020. Although they are planning to do a new one because of some of the challenges in reference to the shutdown as well as the state budget impasse. So as you're looking and trying to make a decision about how you're going to use some of these opportunities to provide additional cash flow for your city, you also need to make sure that you don't wait to the last minute. Too often, you don't want to be in a situation where you're thinking about, okay, we're having some cash flow issues, and maybe your finance people within your jurisdiction are aware of that, but have not brought that to the policymakers or the mayor, or other leaders of your jurisdiction. You cannot wait to the last minute because these things do not happen overnight. You need to make sure that you have an experienced team you're working with, and also people that are familiar with these type of activities and transactions. You may have a solicitor you've worked with for a number of years that have helped you in all kinds of legal issues within your jurisdiction. But the question, does that law firm or group of lawyers have the experience in doing these type of transactions? That's very key. You need to make sure you have the right players involved, and then we're going to talk about that a little bit later. In addition, the bank that you're using, you may have a local bank that you're using that you put your deposits in, but does that bank have the balance sheet to be able to do this type of transaction? So you really need to think about the players you need for this type of transaction if you're looking at a TRAN or a TAN, and you have the relationships to work with those type of professionals that can help your jurisdiction get through this situation. So you need to make sure you're thinking about those things. And like I said, you can't wait to the last minute. You also may want to think about timing of when you're going to do this type of transaction, because as you go into the beginning of your next calendar year, you're getting closer and closer to the fiscal year. And the timing of these transactions also impact other dynamics you're looking at from a budgetary standpoint. So a lot of these things are important issues, but it's very, very key to make sure you have the right players helping you to navigate these concepts. You also need to think about how are you going to explain to either constituents or other key officials on why you're taking this action. If it's coming from the mayor's office or it's coming from an executive branch, making sure you're talking with your legislative branch in reference to this type of transaction so they understand why you're doing it. You don't want to be in a situation where you're concerned about cash flow and you're moving in a path and then you haven't really explained to some of the appropriate parties and stakeholders why you're taking these actions, especially if you're a jurisdiction that has never done this type of transaction in the past. So it's important to make sure you have the right stakeholders engaged and involved and educated about why you're taking this action if you've never done so in the past, as well as making sure you have the right professionals helping you in this transaction. And I'll close with this as well. You also want to make sure that you're not relying on this as a new form of budgeting. It's kind of like a credit card. You know, you don't want to be always using your credit card for operations. Yes, you have emergencies. That's why I look at the TRAN or TAN as an emergency situation where you have something like a 9/11 or COVID, which has really impacted the operations of your jurisdictions. But try not to rely on this, just like you don't want to rely on using your credit card for buying basic operations for your household. You should not be doing the same thing in reference to your operations and budgeting for your jurisdiction. So that's just some of my initial thoughts in reference to my experience as a finance chair in the city of Philadelphia, and we'll have a continued conversation about why pursue this type of revenue financing.
Thank you, Derek. And turn it over to, we'll dig a little deeper with Tim and get into some of these details that Derek was alluding to.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you for the intro. As Tom mentioned, I'm a director at PNC Capital Markets, and I've been around for about 20, almost 2 decades inside the municipal market. I mean, I know Derek said that he's a recovering banker. Unfortunately, I have not yet completed 12 steps. But during that time, I have definitely seen a lot of crises. I think Dave, myself, Derek, Zach, we can all attest to the different things that we've seen inside the municipal market over that time. They say they're black swan events, but they seem to be happening more frequently. We've seen financial crisis, we've seen liquidity crisis, we've seen tax law changes, we've seen pandemics, basically everything under the sun. And because of options like these and because of the financing teams, we help our municipalities and our issuers navigate those crises. I like to say that sometimes these bankers work on commissions via what these structures, because there's a lot of structures out there, but each one is specifically designed to help our clients traverse those crises and those cash flow gaps. As we mentioned here, what are the options that are available to all of our jurisdictions? Well, these are the 3 main ones, and these can branch out into, a variety of different options. I know we just wrapped up or are in the process of wrapping up the state budget impasse, but we just actually recently worked on a proposal that was not a tax revenue or tax anticipation. It was a state aid anticipation. It was specifically focused and primered off of the state aid that would be coming from the state. So again, there's a variety of different structures to this, but these are kind of the 3 main branches of them. I know Derek mentioned the revenue. This is strictly based on revenues that you could see coming in. They're mostly used for like authorities, sewer authorities, water authorities, or more likely a school district intermediate unit that is a conglomerate of a local unit or local schools around. That's not necessarily what we'll be focusing on here, nor is it the tax anticipation note, which is just the taxes that you anticipate coming in. This is used by the boroughs, the cities, the townships, and the counties. Come at it from the perspective of the investor. We're looking at these as the tax revenue anticipation notes. Well, why would you want both the tax and the revenue as a security for this? Well, it's the same reason why you get a cosigner on a mortgage or something of the like. It's because you have better security for it, and that's going to wind up getting you a better rate. So not only do you have the tax revenue, but you also have the revenues, coming in from other revenue sources. So all in all, that's going to help you lower your rate that you're going to get from a PNC bank or a local depository. So that's what we're going to be focused on throughout this presentation, which is just the TRAN itself and not any other branches that could show up.
Thanks, Tim. Handing it over to you, Zach.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so again, Zach Williard from PFM. As Tim said, I've also been in this for just about 20 years, and we're not a bank, so you can't come to PFM and get a TRAN. But what we do is we help you figure out the best way to do it, whether it's to talk to your bank or to go find other banks, how to structure it, how to figure out on that last page, am I doing a RAN, a TAN, a TRAN? There's also bands. There's lots of ANDS, so we can help you figure through all the different acronyms. So on this page, you can see at the very top there, one of the real important things that we wanted to highlight, and I think we say this a few times throughout here, is that if you do a TRAN or a TAN or whatever, that you need to repay that within the same fiscal year that it's issued. And, that was a real important topic, as we got into this budget impasse and we started to get into, October, November, and people are looking for money. And, you have to remember that if you do this, you have to pay this off before December 31st of 2025. So you need to have a plan on, on how you're going to do that. One of the options there is when you're thinking through this, if you do a TRAN right now and you don't have any money, well, how are you going to pay it off? So, we did have a lot of clients thinking, well, is there other ways to sort of float yourself to get through this fiscal year? And then maybe you do a TRAN early in 2026, right? So can you do some type of, interfund transfer? Can you use some sort of reserve funds that you have? We even had one situation where people were talking about stopping services, through the end of the year for some departments so that they could figure out how to get through December 31st. And then on January 2nd, you can do a TRAN in 2026, and then you'd have the full year to figure this out, right? The state ended up passing its budget yesterday, which was good news, but, you were sort of crossing your fingers if you quickly did a TRAN or something here and hoping that they were going to do that before the end of the year. And what happens if that didn't happen? So it's real important. The timing of this is very important. In school districts, you probably heard a lot about school districts doing these over the past few months. They're on a different fiscal year, right? So if they did one, this summer or this fall, they have till June 30th before they have to repay it. So it's kind of a different set of facts than what you have as a township or a borough. As Tim said, the TRAN is secured by the pledge of all the taxes and revenues due to the issuer. So it's not a general obligation pledge. For those of the people on the phone that maybe have ever issued debt, whether it was through a bond or through a loan with a local bank, typically you have the general obligation pledge. That's the credit that you're putting forward in order to go to the investors and issue the debt. Here it's the taxes and the revenues due to the issuer. So it's a little bit different than maybe what you're used to when you're doing some sort of longer term borrowing. Oftentimes these are financed through, if we can flip back.
Apologies.
Yeah, no worries. Oftentimes these are financed through a bank loan, but sometimes there is reasons to do a bond issue. When you start talking about Philadelphia and very large numbers, and Philadelphia is probably a bad example because that's even too large maybe to do as a bond issue, but there is certain situations where the bank loan works, and there can be certain situations where a bond issue may make sense. But that's all part of, and you're going to hear us say this a few times too, talking to your financing team ahead of time so you can come up with a good plan, and figure out what works best for your individual township. All right, I'll hand it back to, I think, Dave here.
I can go. Yeah, I can add a few comments to this. So we've talked about what a TRAN is, but it's also the flip side of the coin is also important to discuss what it is not. And first and foremost, it is not long-term debt. This is not a bond issue. This is a short-term bridge to help your cash flow. And we're going to repeat that several times. And it's important because with every type of instrument, it comes along with different types of obligations. This is not a bond issue. This is not a lease. This is not a bank loan. Some of those are or more, you could do a bank loan for 3, 5, 7 years. You could do a bond issue for 30 years. And each one comes with different responsibilities in terms of, disclosure to the market, filings with DCED, things like that. That's why it's very important to have the proper team in place, because you as issuers, you as finance or as managers of your respective jurisdictions, you have a lot of balls in the air, and you may get not necessarily dealing with this cash flow issue. You're dealing with a fire station or a police issue. this is all we do. This is all we are focused on. And we know the ins and outs of it, and we know where the pitfalls lie. So I think Dave has an example of where, maybe one of his issuers fell into one of those traps, and they had to scramble later on to kind of course correct, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can touch on that for a second. I don't want to jump into too much, but I'm Dave Naster. I'm an attorney as well. I work closely with Tom and Derek. We do a lot of financings throughout the Commonwealth. And our biggest job is to make sure we stay within the legal guardrails of making a project happen. And Tim's alluding to a time we were involved in a project where the issuer was not paying attention, and all of a sudden, late, like literally maybe 2 outs in the ninth inning, they realized they needed a tram. They needed some money to get them through this hump. And they literally were scrambling everywhere. And we have to, within the confines of the guardrails, make sure you stay on that track and figure out, well, can you borrow the money? Do you have what it takes to get it done, to get us over the top? And it was an absolute fire drill. As Tim remembers, we were involved, Zach was involved too. It was an absolute fire drill. And we delivered, but that was important because we had to get through issues, we had to jump through approvals, get stuff out, make the deadline so that payroll was made for the municipality, all while still trying to figure out how much borrowing they could actually do and find out how we get the money. I mean, it's just so many steps, which is why having the right team is critical, and knowing early if you need to do this, which is the question I want to ask Derek. When do you start looking at this? When do you start saying, oh, well, this is time to take a real hard look at this?
I mean, and going back to the points that you were making, I mean, someone within your jurisdiction is looking at numbers all the time. And so that person needs to go to the policymakers and say, listen, this is an issue and we need to address it. That's why you can't wait till the last minute. And also it may take some time to make sure you have the right players involved, because you could have a situation that I think you're going to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely right. The trend also has a danger because if you don't have the right players in place, you could make a big mistake. While, as Tim mentioned, he's absolutely right. This does not affect your credit. This does not go against your cap. It could, if it rolls into next year and you didn't do it right, it could. It could not. It could also, doesn't really need any approvals from DCD. They just have to recognize they get it. You don't do it right, you don't pay it back, it could start affecting DCD approvals. I had a situation a few years ago. We were brought in as counsel to help a municipality, a community that had actually done a tram and paid it back, by the way. They had paid it back. They didn't pay it back timely. They paid it back in the following fiscal year. Then they went to borrow more money. A standard bond deal, not even a tram, nothing. A standard, we're going to get a capital program, we're going to borrow money. And guess what? DCD was really shocked. They had actually issued a tram without getting at least approval to DCD, got a certificate, a receipt. They were very upset and created a whole audit of all the financings they had done over the last few years, which was, I think, far more expansive than necessary, but we had no choice. DCED holds all the approvals. They had all the power here. We had to jump through all these hoops. So picture it. We came in. We had not been involved in the financing. The local solicitor, with all respect to them, had done the financing. I can handle this. Not a big deal. Short-term financing. Boom, boom, boom. They're right, except that the rules are so specific for a trans, so unique to this area of the law. As Tim said, this is what we do every day. To know where we're going, we had to go through this much messier, much more expensive cleanup than would have been able to have achieved if in the first instance the team had been in place.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like you said, we have the collective experience of over 100 years. So let us put it to work.
Yeah.
But it sounds like you really want to maintain those relationships over time, even if you don't need to pull the trigger on any of these transactions, so that you can gather your tools and your professionals quickly.
Exactly. And I'll let Derek speak here, but we do check-ins with our clients all the time. We say, hey, we know you might not be thinking about this, but you don't want to get to, middle of December or, that's for a regular fiscal year, but you don't want to get to the 1 yard line and decide, oh, I need a tram, because even if you're a client at PNC, we can move pretty fast, but there's just some bottlenecks that we can't get around, which is like submitting to DCD and things of that nature. So my dad always used to say, work ahead, stay ahead.
And that's a good point that you raised about developing a relationship. So when I served as finance chair, I had regular conversations with a number of different investment bankers and other finance professionals, just letting me know what's happening regarding what's happening in the market, what's happening in other issues, with other issues around the region, around the country, because this helped me as a policymaker to know some of the issues that are occurring And I'm just new things. Like I just learned a state aid anticipation note. Like that was news to me. So it's important for if you're a policymaker that's chair of a finance committee or a mayor, and this is new to you, make sure you're getting information and developing those relationships. So that way, if you do decide you have some cash flow challenges, you now know who to talk to, and you have got some information, and you can explain to stakeholders why you're doing this because you've been learning about this process.
One more quick note on that last slide. It said there that one common misconception I know the PFM sees is that we'll have a client, or maybe it's a new issuer who we don't work with. They'll call us and say that, we were working on a tran, and then the bank said they wanted a mortgage on the property. Now that's not going to be PNC, right? PNC knows that you don't do that. But when you're working with, the First National Bank of, fill in the blank, who doesn't do a lot of these, right, and only has a few branches and doesn't see trans very often, the two big misconceptions we hear are mortgages on properties, which you definitely don't want that. And then the other one that we hear, and it's not on this page, I think we mention it later, is, well, instead of a tran, why don't you just have a revolving line of credit? And as a municipality in Pennsylvania, you are not allowed to have a revolving line of credit. So while maybe that sounds like it makes sense, you just can't do it. You're not allowed to. So you got to watch when, again, you're working with, your local bank, who I'm sure does a great job, and we all appreciate our local banks. But again, this is just something they don't see as often. And you don't want to get caught up in any of those traps, or you can wind up where Dave said, where you're getting audited and it's a big giant mess that you didn't want to happen. So if we flip to page 6, so this is this chart that we have here. This is called the cash flow worksheet. These all look slightly different depending on who you're working with, but they basically do the same thing, right? And so this is what you have to fill out in order to determine how much that you can actually borrow through a TAN or a TRAN. And again, this is another one where, discuss this with your financing team, because if you're working with your local bank and they don't do this much, they don't know this sheet even exists sometimes, right? Again, if you talk to PNC, they're going to send this to you right away. But sometimes the smaller banks don't know about this. And then you're going to work with your team and you're going to fill this sheet out. Now, we do see from time to time, there's kind of different opinions depending on the situation as far as what are you really filling out here. So for example, one that we were just doing for a county a few weeks ago, they only needed money in November and December to get themselves through the year in their human services fund, right? So the question was, am I filling this sheet out for all of 2025, or am I filling this out just for November and December of 2025? And sometimes you kind of do both and you work through it and then you see what the numbers spit out, right? So you can see if you put in your estimated receipts and your expenditures, it's going to show you what the high deficit is. That's that $7,180,000 number in that far right column. And then you're allowed to also add on top of that 5% of the total budget, the total expenditures for that year. So you can see their maximum allowable borrowing amount is $11.98 million. So that's the max. That doesn't mean that's what you should borrow. And then you kind of just have to think through the set of facts. A lot of times we don't see people borrowing all the way up to the max. But sometimes people do want to do that depending on the situation and the timeline. If you're at the end of the year and you kind of have a good feeling for what you need, sometimes it makes sense not to go to the max. If you're doing this January 2nd and you don't know how the year is going to go, well, then maybe that's a different situation where you are going to borrow kind of as much as you can get. So you want to work through some scenarios of this. Sometimes you'll fill out this sheet and it'll say, well, there is no deficit. And you're thinking, well, that's not right. I mean, we know there's a deficit. So you might have to just, again, talk to the bond counsel, talk to your financial advisor, talk to your bank, and kind of figure out a way to make this work so that you can accomplish what the goal is.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Zach, about the I guess flexibility within the worksheet. Obviously the budget impasse at the state is now, solved. It's in our rear view. But, 2-3 weeks ago, that did not look like it was going to occur. And, we had one issuer came to us and said, hey, we need $20 million. And we said, all right, let's work through the cash flow process. We arrived at the number, we saw the cash burn, and then I think there was a little bit of agita on the issuer's side because it only took them to December. And he
Right.
said, you know what? I think we gotta take this out to, January, maybe even February. So we reran the cash flow process and it took us to, 30 million. But, that's the benefit of kind of working together, working through the cash flow sheet, because then you can kind of see, okay, what is my cash burn? How does it look? And, it wound up that he needed the tran for 2 weeks or whatever, but, better safe than sorry, because especially in these times of, black swans and crisis and shutdowns, you don't want to be behind the 8 ball. And I want to stress that because when those crises occur, everybody runs for the door. Everybody runs to their bank and they say, we need money. And you don't want to be working behind because there's only so much money to go around. From a bank's perspective, we can't, just give out to everybody who comes to us. So we work with the people who come in first. We work with our clients to, best meet their needs. But, that's another benefit of staying ahead, especially in times of, volatility and uncertainty. So.
One other caveat to that page, I don't think we said this, maybe we thought it was obvious, but maybe it's not. But when you do these trans, you're borrowing at a tax exempt interest rate because you're a local government, right? And so that gives you a better rate. This page is important because sometimes there can be situations where maybe these numbers aren't making sense and it's not spitting out the right number. You can also borrow a tran as a taxable interest rate. And there can be reasons why that could be beneficial, not necessarily to the interest rate, but to the situation. So again, the discuss with your financing team part, we can't stress that enough, just because, again, this is what we live in and we do these every day. So we can kind of help you think through each individual situation because they're always different. Every one of these situations is different.
Let me give 2 quick examples before we move on. One is an example. We represented a municipality that had literally changed political leadership on election day. They took over early January, different political party took over, and the outgoing administration had basically drained whatever funds were available. And so the new administration walks in and has a lot of uncertainty as to how it's going to make payroll basically in 4 weeks. And that's how tight it was. And so we literally got a phone call because we are well known in the space of being finance counsel, but they hadn't even thought to call a PNC. They hadn't even thought to call a PFM. They literally didn't know where to begin. There's a new administration. We had a hustle and we got a tran issued in time. So payroll was made, no problem. But the point is, if you're going to rush this thing because there's change or whatever, you got to make sure the players are involved right away. It's really critical, I think, to make sure that you have the team together. If you take one thing from this presentation today, it's that something pops and you're getting ready, call someone like any of us because we can help pull the rest of the team together. Because to go in not knowing what to do, a new solicitor in that case I'm describing to you, it was really, they were just swimming upstream. They know where they were, and it was critical. Second example, another situation where a new administration took over. In this case, though, there wasn't quite as much acrimony, and the administration actually, before they came in, let us know they wanted us to run numbers and figure out whether they needed a tran. And we did, and we turned out, literally the new mayor came in, and we didn't do the tran. We worked very, very hard as a group to get numbers together, and at the last minute, they pulled the plug. Now, why is that a good story? It's a good story because they were at least prepared. They were taking all the steps necessary. We were ready to go if that was what was required. And it was a very prudent, safe measure. So my whole point is don't be cavalier, be prepared, no matter what's going on with your elected officials or what have you. At least someone needs to be focusing on, do you think we might need it? Because if it's last minute, it's going to be a race to the finish line. It could be a disaster. So just, again, walk through it. These things happen more than you realize. A lot of folks need a tran. Just be prepared for it.
So we've talked about the how and the what, or the what and the why, but let's talk about the who. We've kind of hit on this a couple different times about who the players involved are, and I think this is an important slide because I don't know if Zach can attest or I can attest. How many times have we each ran into an instance where Zach as the issuer's financial advisor thought that he was the underwriter, or as the underwriter, they thought I was their financial advisor, or the solicitor was the bond account. So it's very important to understand that there's a delineation between each of our roles in this, and each one is a respective expert in that field. I'll let Zach talk about himself, but you know, as the underwriter, what we do is we actually structure the notes. We come up with the terms, you know, later we'll talk about, you know, how does this actually function? Well, we're the ones that, you know, structure the terms of the note. That includes things like, you know, prepayment penalty, obviously the rate that you're going to pay on it, you know, the interest rate, or the, you know, the day count, all of those sort of, you know, nuances, and those come in the form of a term sheet. In addition to that, we work with the compliance, we work with, you know, Obermeyer, we work with Zach, all the while finding the legal structure and helping the issuer, you know, navigate this short-term gap, and also how it's going to look on the back end of once the short term is done, what happens then? You know, because the crisis will end, the budget impasse will end, the black swan will end. What happens at the end of that, and how do you know, deal with the Tran at the end? So that's our function as the lender, as the underwriter. I'll let Dave and Zach kind of talk about their respective roles as well. So
yeah, as the advisor, you know, we're going to help you understand the different options that you have, work through it with you, figure out if you're working with your local bank or some other bank, evaluate proposals, evaluate the options that are provided, and just help you execute it along with the rest of the team. And just to be clear, I mean, nobody wants to do these, right? You don't want to do them. We don't want to do them. Banks don't want to do them. They're not big fees. There's nothing about it that's, you know, great for anybody. These are just things that have to be done in order to survive through some of these tough times. And, you know, we will build a relationship with you and help you through these types of situations that hopefully don't occur too often.
Great. Let me talk a little bit about the different legal roles here. Again, our job is to be the guardrails, to make sure we get this thing done. So it's no harm, no foul. When you refinance, you move on, everything is good. The first role is the solicitor. We are not your solicitor. In fact, I wouldn't even know how to run any of your municipal meetings. I wouldn't try. I wouldn't go there. Your solicitor does that. They are the key people who would never take away or step on their toes in terms of how they make sure that resolutions are properly passed and approved. Their role is to get this through a meeting, properly advertised, properly approved, and to issue an opinion that all this was done appropriately and legally in conformance with their law, with anything that the municipality may have in addition in terms of notice requirements. All that is done properly. That's really, really important because that's an opinion they have to issue in addition to getting the documents approved. Our role as note counsel, as your finance counsel, is a lot of it different, but a little bit importantly connected. We draft necessary documents. These are tax revenue anticipation note resolution that's going to approve the action being taken, going to approve the paperwork that's being filed with DC, going to approve the proposed financing deal that Tim has helped put together, going to approve all of the different worksheets that have been done through Zach and Tim's help to make that whole package understandable and justifiable to the public as well as to DCED in particular. So all that stuff comes together through the note council, through our role, working with everybody. We're kind of like the middle of the train station where everything comes in and gets connected to each other. Then it has to obviously be approved. And when it's approved, we will then issue two things. One, we issue this entire package to DCED. DCED is going to have to look at that. That's critical. They have any questions, anything that may come up. We have to be the point person to get that done. But the other thing we have to do is draft the opinion of the note council, which says that all this has been done in conformity with the state and most importantly, the tax laws related to the state approval, so that you don't have any challenges to your tax-free or tax-free nature of the debt. That's really important because there's something called the Red Book. Throws the word Red Book around. That means that you're actually approved by the state to be in a book. You have the expertise to give that tax opinion, to give that tax knowledge. We're a firm that is in the Red Book, so we can do the due diligence and confirm that everything is in order for this to be tax-free debt. So note counsel is, again, a very unique sort of small avenue, small lane for folks, but that's critical to get done in conjunction with your solicitor so that everything is properly filed and there's no question that it's been done properly.
And Dave, let me ask you a question.
Absolutely.
As a note counsel, who is your client?
Great question. We actually represent the buyers of the debt. The buyers of the debt. The solicitor, to your point, Derek, is the municipality that's issuing that. Very good point.
The reason I raise that because your solicitor is representing you, your jurisdiction. That's why that person cannot serve in that same role as note counsel.
Right.
Once again, why having all the right players involved? Because people have different responsibilities. And your solicitor can also serve in the role as no counsel.
Right, which goes back to my example a few minutes ago of that little municipality that issued the debt through its solicitor and then paid it all off. What's the big deal? Then they go back for more financing 6 months, 8 months later. Oh my God, you would have thought we committed the cardinal sin. DCD was all over their backs, auditing them. We got brought in to sort it all out. So you just gotta have the right people, the right roles. You gotta make sure that they know who they're representing. To Derek's point, the solicitor meant no harm, but he really screwed up all these little things and became a 5-degree fire that didn't need to be. Good point.
So we're going to try to roll through these last couple quickly so we have enough time for questions here at the end. But so we're to start with the TRAN process. We've said this a bunch of times. Start early. Okay. You can't stress that enough. We were talking this morning in our group. We had 49 of these going over the last few weeks. Of those, now that the budget's done, only 19 of them actually closed, right? So we just had a lot of these that were in process, that were ready to go. Some of them, people were getting things approved now so that they could close in January, right? But now they're not going to need them, which is great. That's the scenario we want. But your team is happy to kind of do the work and get you in the right spot ahead of time versus calling us 14 days before you run out of money. That's what we don't want, right? We can still do it, but that just makes it a lot harder. And as Tim had mentioned earlier in that second bullet there, the banks can come overloaded. You know, even big banks like PNCs and the TDs and of the world, I mean, they start to run out of money when the city of Philadelphia and all the surrounding counties and school districts are asking them for a TRAN. So you don't want to be the last one in line asking for money. You want to be, you know, in the beginning or in the middle somewhere. And again, if you don't need it, great. But at least you kind of have the process moving along. So what are your options on how you do this? Depending on the situation, the timing, you know, lots of different things. Again, every situation is different. The first option a lot of the time is, well, let's talk to your local deposit bank on, you know, can they do this? Will they do this? You know, that's sometimes the easy answer. And in these situations, we like the easy answer as long as it's going to also be the right answer. Okay. If that's not going to work, or it's a situation where they don't like their local bank or whatever the reason is, then what we do is we do a competitive bank loan RFP process. All right. So we'll kind of scour the local banks around you, but then we also know some bigger banks that are just willing to do these across the state, even if they're 6 counties away. And then what we do is we send out this RFP, we get all the banks' bids back, and then we'll go through them and evaluate them with the issuer to figure out, you know, the best way to move forward.
So yeah, as Zach mentioned, you know, the first option would be, you know, if PNC was your local depository or we had a relationship, you know, Zach can attest, I think we circled up a couple times and said, you know, hey, let's check in with XYZ school district first. Let's make sure they're okay with their, you know, with their cash flow. And that's what we did. We reached out to, you know, our, you know, combined clients and we said, hey, are you guys okay? Do you need any TRANs? And sometimes it was yes, sometimes it was no. That was kind of the first, I guess, quasi line of defense. And, you know, if they came to us with a TRAN, they're the first in line and we would work through, we would go, you know, start with that cash flow worksheet, determine what they would need. From there, you know, inside the bank, we do our own credit analysis. We ask for your, you know, financials, we ask for your audits, because, you know, we're taking on that liability that, you know, you potentially could not pay it back. Not that, you know, that has ever really happened, but, you know, as a bank, we have to measure that risk. So, you know, based on that credit analysis, then that's how we come up with terms. You know, as your local depository, you're more than likely going to get a better rate just because they're looking at it holistically from the entire relationship. But it will include inside the term sheet, you'll see things like your prepayment. You know, as I mentioned, and as Zach said, you know, a lot of these issuers got these you know, TRANs that they closed on, but now they may have to repay them here. So a lot of the TRANs and the term sheets will describe when and how you're able to prepay that TRAN. You know, it may not necessarily, you may not have to take it out to the full 6 months or whatever. You could be able to prepay it at any time. So that's an important thing to keep an eye on, because like you said, these events could end at any time and you want to be able to pay it back without any penalty. So The other option is what Zach mentioned in the competitive loan process, and that's where the financial advisor is going to kind of run the show. So let Zach kind of run through that.
Yeah, and again, so we'll get these bids back, and there's just a lot of things that you want to consider. A lot of times people think with loans, whether it's short term or long term, you're just looking at the interest rate, and I couldn't stress how important it is. Not that that's not the only thing you want to focus on. You have different things like a drawdown feature. We just were dealing with this on Monday, where the issuer got an option where they could draw down on the money as needed. So they have it in place. If they don't need it, they don't draw on it. But that scenario came with a larger bank fee, and it also had a variable rate of interest. Versus if they did the tran where they were fully funded at settlement. So when it closes, all the money goes into your account. So you start paying interest on that right away, right? Even if you're not using it. But that scenario had no fee and it had a fixed rate. So again, you just had to kind of line it up. You had to run the numbers and figure out which scenario was going to be best. In that scenario, it was going to make more sense to do the drawdown feature, even though they were charging a large upfront fee, because the dollar amount was big. And so they didn't want to be paying interest on $35 million from day one if they didn't really need it. So again, just very important to kind of run the numbers and look at all the options. That third bullet there, that the banks typically need a week or 2 weeks to respond. Again, if we have more time, we like to give them a little bit more time. It's easier for them to have time to go through the financials and put together the right information. But if it's a scramble, fire drill type of situation, people can react, quickly when needed. We just like to avoid that if possible.
Right.
Next slide.
Yeah, so David.
All right, so now we've got the team in place, we've got the proposals in place, we've made a decision. What do we have to do? We have to move reasonably quickly, because usually folks, to Zach's point, do not have a lot of wiggle room. They got to make payroll, got to make expenses. So first, there's a resolution prepared. We were prepared. That's going to have a whole bunch of parts to it. It's going to attach the certification of tax and revenues we talked about earlier today, which justifies that you can afford this borrowing and how you're going to repay it. It's also got different issuance. It's got the actual proposal you have selected. That'll be attached to it also. So that's part of the package. This is the loan you're going with, the loan proposal. This is how you can justify repaying it. Here are the different forms that be filed. Here are the sheets, the worksheets that show it gets done. Oh, also very, very important. Here is your opinion of note counsel that actually approves this all being done properly. Everything is all packaged together. Your solicitor's opinion, everything. One big omnibus resolution is put together and approved at a public meeting, which is properly advertised and approved. Now, you're not done. Very, very importantly, after that happens, we've got to then get this to DCD. This whole package of goods has got to go to DCD. Very importantly, they don't have to approve this, which is kind of weird, right? If you borrow debt for a long-term capital project, DC's got to look at your debt amount you can absorb, whether you have enough, all that good stuff. But this is not a limit. Again, we talked about this earlier. This doesn't go towards your debt cap. This is debt short term to get through a time period that's within the fiscal year. If it goes beyond it, it becomes a problem. As long as it's in the fiscal year, though, DCD merely has to acknowledge it's received your package, literally a receipt. Once you have that receipt that says they've gotten it, you can close. You can literally prepare to close. Obviously, the promissory note, which is also part of the package, certification, the funding sheets, the UCC filing, all this stuff is part of the closing itself, the signed opinion letter of the solicitor, the sign of the note counsel's opinion, all that's big package. It's got to get together. But once we get the package into DCD, we can get the receipt back. We can close very, very quickly. We can get your money from the day you actually have the public meeting and we get the package to DCD a couple days later. Within probably a week, we can get you closed, maybe 10 days, get you closed so you can get those funds out and use them to make payroll, whatever obligations you have.
Well, speaking of timeline.
There we go. Timeline.
Nice job.
Yeah, so real quick on this timeline. So this is a beautiful timeline with plenty of time, right? This is not usually how it
Most
works.
beautiful timeline.
Right. But in the perfect scenario, this would be, how we'd like to do it. And we had a lot like this, as I mentioned, where you were preparing, you were prepping, you had a date, lined up for when you could approve it. We had some that were even approved, but we're just not going to settle on them. This was all to get you to like a January 2nd, January 3rd type tran. to move forward into the new year. So again, just going back to the thought that you want to talk to your team, you want to have the professionals in place, and you want to talk about it early, right? Those are the two keys to figuring out these types of situations, and getting the best results for your municipality.
And there is an ability to compress this timeline. I know there was a historical instance where I think we were working on a tran heading into Christmas and closing on New Year's or the day before New Year's, so that they didn't miss payroll on January 2nd. It was not a happy holiday that year. So this is the best, that's the worst. So hopefully we can find something.
And is that somewhat unique to the size of PNC to be able to pull off something like that? Not that you want to do it again.
Yeah, we had to cash in a few political chips internally to say, get this done, but it's definitely not recommended operating procedure, but it can be done.
But just to reiterate in reference to timing and not waiting to last minute, if you see these scheduled events, you also have that in bold, regular scheduled board meeting, whatever the entity that's considering and making that decision. Like I said earlier about making sure you're not waiting to last minute, also engaging stakeholders, that this has got to come to a vote, making sure that you have the votes to get it passed. All of this time is an important aspect in reference to scheduled events, because for elected officials, you have other things you may be dealing with at the same time. And so if you're the finance chair, you've got to get this in. You may have talked with other members of the committee or other people who are making a vote on that decision. So as we said multiple times in this presentation, do not wait to the last minute. Make sure you have the right players involved that have the experience and understanding of how to get these things done, but also making sure you're informing the stakeholders what you're doing. But if you get a compressed timeline, you're gonna have to make decisions quickly in scheduling, in addition to this timeline of scheduled events.
So maybe I can check in real quick with Jennifer to see if there's questions.
Yep, we actually don't have any questions in the chat, so we can leave it open afterwards for any questions that come through.
Okay, great.
Well, let's just hammer home the final conclusion. And again, happy to ask some more questions, but I guess it always falls upon me as the kind of guardrail guy in the law. You want to be ready early, talk to your finance people early, get a team assembled early. Even if you don't go through and end up using a tran, again, I told the story earlier, that's okay. That's okay. Get yourself together so that it's not a fire drill. It's going to make everyone's life easier. You're not going to be worried about missing payroll. So we've had municipalities, like I say, come to us that aren't sure if they're going to do it. We do a lot of work. It goes to the 5-yard line. They pull back because they think they have enough revenue ready in place. We have others that have done it and couldn't have been happier they started early. So just be mindful of that effort early will pay off. I am certain your municipality will need financing at some point, whether it's a bond or whether it's a tran. So bringing a team together is an investment that's well intended and will work out and pay dividends. Get the team together so we can look at things. Secondly, it's not a long-term line of credit. Don't think of, well, every year I can take a tran. It does hurt your rating. It does make it a little bit harder to get money. So just be commonsensical about it. Be prepared, run the numbers. If you think it's tight to not have a tran, then go for the tran by all means. But if you're going to make it, you're going to make it. It's just be smart about it and use it as a vehicle to help you to the next fiscal year. And lastly, be mindful when the next fiscal year is. To Tim's point, to be in a spot where you're racing at something done, if your fiscal year, like for example, so many of us have December 31st for fiscal year. If the state budget had not passed yesterday, I think a lot of folks would have been borrowing money the next few weeks in the last 6 weeks of the year. I mean, that's nuts, right? That seems like a lot of work and effort. But be mindful. If you got to get it done, be prepared, get started early, and know when your end date solution is.
Yeah, and the one thing I'll just add kind of because we didn't really touch on it, but in terms of fees, I've seen a lot of people a question that comes up frequently is, well, what's it going to cost me if this doesn't, close? It'd be a minimal cost, because a lot of the bank fees, no council fees, they don't get paid unless it settles. So, not that Zach is overly thrilled about doing 49 different issues and only having 19 of them closed. He didn't get paid for 49. You guys aren't incurring fees that you're going to pay. It's, again, better to work ahead. Don't be scared about incurring fees, because unless it closes, unless you actually use the tran, any fees that you incur will be very, very small.
Yeah, and typically, again, these are done more as favors by everyone involved, whether it's, the financial advisor, the bank, the note counsel. So these fees are all pretty small compared to, if you go borrow $5 or $10 million through a bond issue, there can be, more sizable fees. That's not what this is. We know that these are things that, have to happen in order to keep people afloat. We use them as relationship builders, and they're done kind of more, as friendly favors. So
We did just have a question come through. So it says, could you please discuss the compensation of the professionals during this process? Expertise is not free. Our council is interested in moving down this route to preserve cash during the beginning of the year as opposed to rebuilding fund balance in 1 year. But one of our concerns is what we pay in professional fees during the process.
yeah, I think every situation's a little bit different. I don't know if that came in before or after I just went through my little spiel there, but I think the costs would be pretty minimal. You're talking about, a few thousands of dollars, not, $50,000 type of situation. So, you would want to hear more about the story and what exactly is going on and how big the number is and those types of things, before we can, tell you exactly what the fee would be. But usually they're pretty minimal. And again, we try to do these as more relationship and favor type situations because, we know that this isn't what you want to be doing either.
Yeah, from the bank's perspective, outside of what we pay our councils, the bank doesn't incur a fee. It's built into the rate. So it's not like, we're charging you a 3% rate and then you pay us $50,000. It's inside that 3%. So there's not an additional rate. We obviously do have to pay our council, but again, that's a couple $1,000s, nothing egregious.
It's far less than a big bond project they may be doing.
Yeah.
Far less.
So we're happy to chat with whoever brought that up further, but yeah, usually pretty minimal.
And that's a list of all of our contacts right there on the screen. I think, Jen, are you going to be able to, or we can circulate the whole presentation so folks can not only see the valuable information, but also our contacts? Great.
Right. Well, we're glad that the budget passed yesterday, and maybe this is a little bit less valuable than it was 24 hours ago, but that's a good thing.
Absolutely. And we thank everyone for your time, your interest in this. And if we can help answer questions, like I say, all of us can answer most of these questions, but we try to break it down to, what's it like to get a financial advisor? What does it mean to be an underwriter? Why am I doing this? In Derek's case, like, what the heck are these guys thinking? We've lived all those questions. Tom and I, the guardrails, we got it. We're happy to help. So contact any of us. If it's the wrong person, we'll fix it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you guys.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.